This is a video long time coming. If you remember a couple of years ago we showed the rebuilding of an NHC 250 Cummins motor out of one of our Army trucks. It was part of a series of motors that took a crap during our tourist operations where we run these trucks in the summertime, giving tours at incredibly high altitudes up in the mountains. And it took a while for us to figure out that we were torching liners simply from EGTs, a combination of using this particular motor behind an automatic and very steep hills, long climbs at very high altitude. Regardless, this motor had been sitting on the floor of Dad's shop for the better part of 2 years, and since it's the size of a small car, he indicated that he'd like it out. On the other hand, we had sort of neglected getting it out of there because it made sense to us to drop it back in one of the trucks. In case you're curious, there are three. The one that is being pulled into the trench right now is the donor truck of the motor that was currently under the hood of last year's tour truck that had an in-frame rebuild right at the start of the 2017 tourist season, and it ran okay 2018. It's got an injector that's weeping a little bit extra. But so as to why we're pulling this bad boy down into a trench, well, quite frankly, we do not have the reach on our backhoe, our loader. It can lift the weight, it just can't lift it quite high enough. So we made a little extra height by channeling our inner mole man and digging ourselves a bit of a trench. If you followed us for the last few years, you'll know that's actually how we got the motor in and out of the one we did before. If you're coming to this video looking for specifics, quite frankly, you're not going to find them. This is just sort of looking at us making the transition. A lot of it is actually in time-lapse photography. The thing is, at this point, you really kind of already need to know what you're doing in order to get here. The trucks, they aren't complicated. It's just very, 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 very heavy. Get your owner's manual, your TMs, and follow those. But most of it is pretty straightforward kind of stuff. Not crazy at all. If you're doing it because you've blown a motor, take it from me. Do an in-frame. It is way easier to do an in-frame. The actual rebuilding is harder, but the act of pulling the thing so that you can rebuild it on a stand, just do the in-frame. In fact, the one you can see over the back of the one in the trench is actually waiting on an in-frame. We are not going to pull that motor. And that is the very first Army truck from 2014, the one I drove back from Colorado. That's the 1,000 miles in an M923 video if you've ever watched it. So here we go. We started by lifting the hood off. This hood had simply been set on top of it in order to keep the rain out or whatnot, just a place to store the hood. So it wasn't even tied down. The motor, we've rolled it out using the overhead hoist and the rolling engine puller there. And we're coming in with the 48 International, big old International tractor, and we're going to go ahead and fly it in. Now this is why we put it down in a trench. This is our second motor going in, although it's been a few years. So we've worked out some kinks. We've got a bit of a spreader from the top two lift points. What we actually do is slowly lower the motor down and then roll the truck underneath of it. We found that that is way easier than trying to deal with these massive motors up in the air. So here I've got it chained to the blade, and then as Dad pivots the blade, he pulls the truck forward incrementally, very, very controlled. And then I sort of, wiggle it, and we bounce back and forth between machine to machine. And it's just us trying to make do with what we've got. Yes, it'd be way better with a wrecker or a crane or any number of things, but we don't own those things. We have these two lovely old machines, and they serve very, very admirably. And this is not their first rodeo in this particular instance. Flying the thing in isn't particularly hard. In case you're curious, this is sped up where 1 minute is 20 minutes in real time. So the actual, from flying the motor up into the frame to dropping it down on the motor mounts with bolts in it, was 110 minutes total. So we did okay. It's not particularly hard. There's just a lot of finagling. It doesn't want to fit in there. I don't think you could get it in with the PTO in place. So you're going to want to try to put that in later. And I'll give you some hints as to get that back in. In fact, it's probably the only real tip I can give you. Other than this is just like dropping a motor in almost any other vehicle, only it's way heavier and everything is more finicky. The only downside, we totally forgot to lift the cab. The major bonehead move on our part. So we'd forgotten to lift the cab, which gave us extra room. The other trick you might want to do is put a jack on the front bumper and let the axle droop out from underneath of you. And what we did is we used a porta-power, and we jacked off the spring against the frame. And what that does is it forces the front axle to drop down and out of your way. And those, you can get an inch and a half really easy by doing that. And that inch and a half is important. It's really, really nice. Here, Dad is steering it from the top, and I am guiding it from down underneath, just trying to fly it through the maze of airlines, specifically on the driver's side, that are a real pain in the butt. Now, I ended up with some on top of the motor mount that are probably supposed to be below, and I ended up with some below the motor mount that are probably supposed to be on top, but none of them are too tight, and I can zip tie them out of the way. They won't rub. It's just the way it ended up being, and that's how it's going to go. This motor has the actual Cummins kit. The one we're running right now has a Chinese kit. Not that there's any real difference, right or wrong. In fact, the Cummins kit probably comes from China. It just costs an extra $1,000. But this is the good motor. So if I ever decide to sell out the business, this is the truck I plan on keeping. And I want the bed off the one you saw in the background in the last shot, with the hoops and the cover and the sidewalls. This bed was modified by a logging company, and I really don't want to keep that one. So I'll put this bed on the very first truck and then sell it, and then sell the current tour truck either with the business or to some rich guy who wants to shoot things off of his ranch out of the back of the truck, which sounds like a great idea. But that's down the road when we decide we're done. At this point, the motor is essentially in. Again, if you came to this video looking for specifics, there really aren't any. You're just kind of gonna sort of have to do it. The only tricks you want to keep in mind, go ahead and jack up not the axles now, but jack up the frame of the truck. Let the axle drop out from underneath. It'll save you some time and energy. And then don't forget to lift the cab. We dang near got it in without lifting the cab. And I'm going to go ahead and say that's not moronic on our part. It shows skill. All right, so you're putting your PTO back in. Here's how to do it. With a lot less hassle. First, you pull that lower transmission cooler filter line off. Grab a ratchet strap, remove the clamps that hold your winch PTO lines, the pressure lines, and you reef them over to the side. And you take the oil line off the PTO itself. Before you even try, you take the two studs out of the side of the block and cut 1/4 of an inch off of them, reshape them, and put them back in. 1/4 of an inch, no more. Then you actually fly the PTO up here into the frame channel, slide it forward. You can put a rope around the top edge and have somebody up on top help guide you And then from underneath here, with all this room, you can slip it up and in.
Over the two studs.
Over the top of the two studs. And make sure you have your long bolts. There's a long bolt in the bottom, that's the really long one, and the short long bolt in the top. They both got to be in there first. Otherwise, you'll never be able to get them in afterwards. But then you should be able to fly it right down the frame rails, slip it up and in. It worked really well. This is what, our third attempt?
Yeah.
Second attempt, something like that. So pull that, pull the little line, pull these over, cut those studs off shorter, and you can fly it up and in without any problems at all. Or at least compared to what it would be like. I'm sure you came here looking for more guidance. This is just one of those things that you're going to have to do. There are just too many steps to give you a quick little blow-by-blow of the entire process. It's doable. It's not super complicated. Remember a couple of those things, right? Jack up from the bumper, drop that axle down, and then block it up with some wood. Remember what I said about the PTO. Getting the PTO in was a nightmare the first time we did it. And those are hard-won lessons right there. Specifically, cutting those studs off. That was wonderful. Don't cut them too far or we won't have any threads for your nut. If you've done it perfectly, you should have studs that just come to the end of your nuts. That's what she said. Just come to the end of your nuts. No farther than that. Speaking of your nuts, go to the hardware store and buy yourself a box of 3/8 fine thread nylocks, a box of 3/8 coarse thread nylocks, and a box of 1/2 inch fine thread nylocks. And then you take every single crushed steel lock nut that the U.S. military spec'd out for this truck, and you throw it as far and as hard as you can at something you dislike, because those things are the devil. Just get rid of them. When you're talking about tightening up a hose bracket to the frame, it should not require 5 minutes of effort and a blood sacrifice to get it loose, because it is a crimped steel lock nut. Toss those buggers. Those are your tips. Block that axle down. Don't forget to lift the cab. Cut off the studs on your PTO so they're just long enough that the nuts clip on. And then do yourself a favor and please go get those nylocks. You will save yourself like 20 minutes of effort and a couple of pints of your red finest in those two instances alone. Those are my top tips. I'm happy to help anybody. At this point we can answer so many questions about these things. Once more, it's not complicated, it's just super heavy. Dear God, don't put yourself between any two pieces of metal that may come down without any warning. The whole time we did it, we basically were prepared for that motor to drop at any moment. Do that. Do yourself a favor. None of this crap is worth getting hurt to fix. If you're just sitting there with a bum motor in your yard, let's have a chat about an in-frame. That is by far, I wish I had never pulled these motors. The idea of pulling and swapping one, we did it because we thought we were short on time. I would have been better off to just burn that extra tour time and wait for that in-frame kit to arrive in my backyard. I would have been so much farther ahead than messing with yanking these motors. Hard-won lesson right there. Good luck. I hope you never need any of this. I hope you found some wisdom there. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.